Coming up on episode 71 of the Behind the Back podcast, the Sacramento Kings fired Mike Brown. What does that mean for the direction of the franchise? We offer our takes here. The Philadelphia Eagles clinched the 2 seed, have nothing to play for. Will Saquon go for the rushing record? The Eagles announced anything? We will talk about that here. Then the San Francisco 49ers, the Brock Purdy got hurt in a way that you definitely didn't want to expect with his elbow. We break down what that potentially means for his contract negotiations, as well as looking forward to next year's schedule. Then the Chargers, they made the playoffs. They are locked in. Our third team of the year made it through. We will talk about potential implications of this week going into it. And then we finish off with our betting picks of the week. So with that being said, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your host. I am Marcos Conan-Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet. Rhett, Ben, Happy New Year. How are you doing, brother?
Happy New Year. Yeah, I'm doing good, man. I had a pretty quiet New Year's Eve and celebrated with the girlfriend. We're getting over being sick, so apologies for sounding stuffed up, but it sounds like all of Northern California has gotten hit with this terrible virus. So yeah, getting over it.
Definitely getting over it myself. So yeah, you'll definitely hear us sniffling throughout the pod. So we apologize for that. But for all you guys out there, Happy New Year. We are recording on New Year's Day early in the morning, our first morning pod. This is fun. Love doing that, getting up and early. So we have a lot to talk about, unfortunately, and a lot of it's not good. So we're going to, as you heard in the intro, we got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So we're going to start with the Sacramento Kings. And, you know, a lot of stuff has happened in just one short week. And I remember when I was talking on the last post-game pod for the Eagles, I had brought up, okay, we'll see what happens with the Kings. Hopefully, you know, they make a move and can right the ship a little bit. And they did make a move. They made a major move, and a move that I don't think anybody wanted or expected. And that comes in the form of the Kings firing Mike Brown. And it kind of felt all of a sudden. We figured a move was coming, but we weren't sure if it was a trade or just some roster shift in general. But I guess it ended up being Mike Brown being fired. And there's been a lot of nasty stuff that's coming from this in terms of how the Kings handled it, whose decision was it really, did the players get consulted? All of this has come from it. So before we're going to start diving into the nitty gritty of it all. But Ben, I want to get your initial reaction to the Mike Brown firing. What did you think of it?
So, you know, I kind of posted something on Twitter or X that really speaks about how we as fans feel. And I wanted to kind of just, you know, I want to read that off because I think it's a good point to start for us, because this is a mutual feeling around Sacramento right now after this Mike Brown firing. So I tweeted back on Friday when it happened, at Monty McNair, thanks for putting the Sacramento Kings right back where they were just a few good but short years ago. No coach, player, or person in their right mind wants to come to the Kings again. But hey, it can't get worse, right? Zip up your vest and invest in winning basketball moves. This city and these fans deserve better than the product that has been presented the last 19 years in Sacramento. Whether you are directly responsible for the poor history of this team in those years or not, you fired the one guy who held you accountable, who held people accountable on a nightly basis. You built an offensive juggernaut for a defensive-minded head coach. And when your head coach couldn't do more to get your offensive players to buy in defensively, you fired the guy who completely changed basketball in Sacramento. De'Aaron Fox and the rest of these players deserve better. What is that? 5 head coaches in 8 years for Foxy? Not to mention how you fired Mike Brown was just as classless as the previous occasions. It's sickening, truly sickening. I feel for the fans of this disorganization who continue to pay a lot of money to support this team on a night in and night out basis. So this is something that is irking as a Kings fan, because you go through these number of years of just what seems like torture as a Kings fan. You watch this poor product being put on the court every single game, every single season, and you don't see the proper improvements. You don't see a commitment to winning moves. And then you have this general manager in Monty who starts to make some of the right decisions that a winning organization would do. And then he brings in Mike Brown. And it feels like you finally get your GM and your coach on the right like timeline and the right decision, because for a number of years you didn't have the general manager and the head coach being the mutual decision to work with each other. You had, one coming in inheriting the other and vice versa. So you finally have this commitment to each other and this commitment to the plan moving forward. And then when your team finally hits adversity 3 years later, after you've continuously put off as a general manager, building this team the way that it should be built and making the proper moves to stay competitive, you then fire the guy who completely helped you change the culture and shift momentum in Sacramento. So it just feels like, bro, we took 3 or 4 steps forward from where we were a number of years ago, and now we've taken 6 backwards.
Mm-hmm. I guess my question to you is you mentioned on the tweet that it was Monty. You're like at Monty, but I wonder how much of this was actually Monty and how much of this was Vivek. And it's weird. I think Vivek might have an allergy to guys named Mike or Michael. It just never
Yeah.
seems to end well. Um, with our last recent firing of that kind of nature was Michael Malone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and listen, from my perspective of things, for Mike Brown, I wish him the best. I don't think he was the issue. But I do, there has to be some semblance of, I'm sure there was a little bit of maybe Mike's message was getting stale. Maybe his message just wasn't connecting with this particular group of guys. There was reports coming out that him and Domas had a tricky relationship. So it was interesting to see and hear everything that's kind of come out of this. It was ugly the way they let him go. Um, they said the players, De'Aaron Fox, DeMar, and Domas were not consulted in this decision. Um, and Mike Brown had been fired. I believe they said it was on the way to the facility. They did it over the phone. It wasn't
On the
even
way to the airport.
on the way to the airport. It wasn't even in person. So,
Mm-mm.
which was, again, that's terrible. It's like I guess it just shows how much winning kind of masks everything, because these past couple of years we kind of felt like as an entire organization we turned a corner. Like it felt like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're now a functional franchise, something that we thought Vivek took a back seat. Monty McNair was kind of doing his thing. We had the system, we had the guys. Like it just kind of felt like it was coming together, only to figure out that it was kind of never as put together as it seemed. So it's just disappointing. It feels like we're right back to square one, but the difference is we have all these pieces, we have all this talent. um so replacing Mike Brown is Doug Christie, former Sacramento Kings stud, and he's been an assistant coach since 2018, I believe. um and listen, it's good for Doug, opportunity he always wanted to have, but it's an interim head coach. That definitely doesn't mean that he's staying long term. I would be surprised if they keep him long term, but the question moving forward is, okay, what is the plan? What's going to happen next? Do they have coaches in mind already that they're like, okay, they're going to be available next offseason, we're going to go after the so or so dudes? And is that going to be a fix? And then what do they do to the roster in the meantime? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do we start having the conversation of what life looks like in a De'Aaron Fox trade? Or is it going to be maybe we're pivoting on DeMar or pivoting on some of these young pieces in order to try and get better now? The problem is this Mike Brown move should be like, otherwise why make it? It should be a precursor to something bigger or something different that's signaling a shift for the franchise. um I don't know. I hate this feeling. I just don't know where we're at anymore. And it sucks because, again, we have the talent, we have the skill. Maybe we don't have the roster balance that some of these teams do. And that's why we're suffering in some of these games. But I just, the expectation coming into this year was we were a playoff team. And to see where we're at now, it's PTSD. It's frustrating. Um, but there's a lot of options we can talk about. But I don't know if you had a preference on how you would want things moving forward.
I really, My preference would have been moving forward with Mike Brown, and that's the thing that I'm stuck at right now. Because as a franchise, when if you step back and you look at this overall situation, you look at De'Aaron Fox and his post game conversation that he had with the media, or lack thereof a conversation, his lack of accountability that he took, on the podium at the end of that game against Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
that seemed like a precursor to a massive move, which ultimately was the Mike Brown firing. Now, is that to say that De'Aaron Fox is solely responsible for Mike Brown getting fired? No.
No.
But I do think that, all these players played a role in Mike Brown ultimately being let go. And that role was just not locking in. And as a front office, you got to look at that and you got to think, well, why are guys not locking into the same idea they've been locked into for the last 2 years? What's different this year? And that's where, I guess I can kind of understand why a franchise would make that decision. But then you think about what De'Aaron Fox's future looks like. You think about the conversation that Rich Paul, his agent at Clutch Sports, with De'Aaron Fox had with the front office prior to Mike Brown's firing. You think about that conversation and how De'Aaron Fox and his camp are holding the Kings accountable for the proper moves to keep De'Aaron in Sacramento. And Sacramento has talked about how they want to keep De'Aaron here. They want him to be here. They don't want to trade him. They came out after Mike Brown firing and said, we don't want to trade him. We don't have a plan for trading him. So what is your plan? Because you didn't consult De'Aaron Fox before you fired his one stability, point, his one stable point on this team for the last 8 years. Like, this is the part that I don't know the direction that the Kings are going to take. Now, you did talk about, like, this could be the setup for a bigger goal, for a bigger, reset or whatever the case. Like, it has to be. Because at this point, you can't just fire Mike Brown and then find success. That's not how it's going to work. You hope that you can find that energy, and kind of get that energy shift that people talk about when you fire a coach and move in a different direction. There is an energy shift, but it goes away after a certain amount of games and you're back to where you were because you haven't made any roster changes. So the
Right.
changes at the trade deadline are going to be key to see where this team kind of goes directionally, because you can absolutely continue going backwards if you don't flip some of these guys for the right pieces. And if you're ultimately deciding that it's time to move on from the core of Sacramento, those core players being De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Keegan Murray, Malik Monk, like, if you're choosing to move on from one or all or any of those guys and you don't bring in the proper pieces, you don't get the right return, at that point you are completely failing as a franchise to build for the future.
Right, and then that's the biggest question, right? Because Foxy is under contract till next year. So this year we don't have to move him, and that's, I think the logic
Mm-hmm.
is, okay, we don't have to move him this year, but why not explore the possibility of what happens if we do move him? Listen, I'm one of the biggest De'Aaron Fox defenders. I loved him ever since we drafted him, but the one thing I have noticed now that he is in his prime, he's I don't think there's much more in his game that he can grow and improve on from where he's at. He is a top 15 caliber player. He is the leader of a team, but I do wonder how high the ceiling on this team truly can go. Was 2022 the highest we could go with De'Aaron Fox as the number one option on this team? And that's a legitimate conversation that teams need to start having with themselves when a player like Fox reaches kind of the pinnacle of his peak of his powers. Where do we go from there? And I kind of think we're seeing it time and time again last year and this year. It's continuing the same trend. Fox puts up good numbers. He kind of disappears sometimes, but then he also has the moments where, oh crap, this dude can be the best player every single game. But that's the thing. It hasn't resulted in success. He is won significantly less than he has lost here in Sacramento. And part of that was the team building. But once we got the roster around him, you think it would work. But so I'm nervous. I'm nervous on the ceiling of this team with Fox as the number one player. And at the same time, if he reaches that all NBA status, then we now owe him a supermax contract of $300 million, which would definitely keep him in the city. Most likely, it would increase our
Mm-hmm.
leverage of keeping him because we would be the only team capable of paying him that level of money. So, but then that's the question: You have Domas for $250 million. You have De'Aaron for $300 million, and then you have this first apron to worry about. Where this team, you don't, with the way the salary cap is set up now, if you go over that apron, first or second, you need to know that this team that you have, this roster that you have, is capable of winning a title and nothing less. Um, so that's what makes it hard. So do we leverage De'Aaron Fox while he's at his cheapest, which also gives us the luxury of being able to move around more pieces versus being stuck under a monumental contract that we would have a harder time trading out of and would probably have to settle for a package of stuff to make things work. And it would also limit the options of who we could get, because you're paying a max contract. Only so many players can be moved for that level of money. So it makes, we're stuck in this weird situation that if Fox plays well, especially in the second half of the year, we we might be forced to just sign him, so we don't lose him, but then it's just going to end up not working out at the end of the day. So I'm worried about this team and where it's going to go if we're stuck with De'Aaron Fox. And I hate saying that because, again, I love De'Aaron Fox. I think he is capable of being a leader, but I think his ceiling as a player is the second best player on a championship team. But the problem is, are we going to be able to find that best player without trading him? So that's the part that I'm battling with right now.
Yeah, and I love Foxy too, but somewhere where I disagree with you is you talked about how you like Foxy as a leader. I haven't seen the leadership. I just haven't. I haven't seen the accountability. I haven't seen, like, you see it after the fact, after you calm down, but you know, I struggle so much with paying any guy that much money, knowing that then you still got to build a team around him that's semi cheap, because that's a lot of money. I struggle paying a guy that much, knowing that he's not the leader of this team. He's not the guy pulling us out of every bad situation and leading us to every good situation. Like, he falls into the mix of every single player in the struggles that happen, and he also falls into the mix of the highs. So, whatever the case is that's going on the court, Foxy is fitting right in with what's going on. And you just can't have that from a leader. And that's been my pain point for this season when we've had this conversation so many times of the lack of leadership. I've been talking about a lack of leadership after 6 games of the season. Like, call it too early if you want, but I was seeing how it was, and it's reared its ugly head. This was what I was afraid of, was getting to a situation and getting to a point where there's so much lack of leadership from a coaching standpoint, from a player standpoint, that the front office is forced, their hand is forced to make some move. I will never trust the Kings front office to make the right move when their hand is forced to do anything. Like, that's quite simply where we're at with this organization, and where we've been for a number of years. When this team is not winning and making winning basketball plays, and just ultimately holding themselves to a higher standard, and they're forcing themselves to make moves, it's never going to be the right move. And this is where I'm, concerned, because you fall into this situation with De'Aaron Fox now, where you wonder if he's happy. What would make you happy, De'Aaron? Is it money, or is it playing winning basketball? Because he's been playing losing basketball his entire NBA career. He's really never had a winning situation. And I know he had the 2 years here in Sacramento, one of them making the playoffs, but that, in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't far outweigh all the losing that he's been going through. So from
Right.
that standpoint, I look at De'Aaron Fox and I'm like, free that man. Like, let him go play real winning basketball somewhere and have a legit shot at having a legendary career,
Mhm.
because you're not going to have a legendary career here in Sacramento. It's simply how it looks at this point. You are in your prime, and they've continued to let you down as a team in terms of building the right pieces around you. So that's where I'm looking at this, and I'm like, you got to get De'Aaron Fox out of Sacramento, because you're going to get the best return for him. If you want to talk about a rebuild situation, this is the time to do it. You just fired your head coach. You're in a situation now where your team is scratching and clawing for every last win against a team with 5 starters out, basically. Like, you went down 20 points against the Dallas Mavericks a couple nights ago. You fought back really well, played some damn good defense in the second, third, and fourth quarter, and shots were falling. But is that sustainable? That wasn't even a fully healthy team. They were missing 3 of their best players. So
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I just see it. I think it makes the most sense to rebuild, and it's not a retool. It's not a Niners situation. It's not an Eagles situation going into this year. This is a rebuild situation. You fired the guy who completely shifted the tides in Sacramento, and at this point, you got to look at the management and think: is it time to rebuild the management too? Is it time to address this dumpster fire of an organization that for a number of years has just failed to put a proper and good product out on the floor for the Sacramento Kings?
And the part that worries me the most is Vivek. I think out of all this, like he did a good job getting Monty, putting capable pieces around, but then he refuses to let anybody do their job. And I
Right.
think it's very we see this all the time in every sport. There's always an owner, a few owners that always make waves with their they're being too in the mix, too involved because they're more fans than they are owners. So it's like and I get it. Like you have the money, you have the resources. It's your team. Do what you want with it. But I think at the same time, you need to be aware. Vivek's going down there and sitting every single game in front of the fans, front row, all the time. So it's like you're putting yourself in the light. You're going to get booed consistently every time they see your face now, especially with the firing of Mike Brown. Like this is all the negative nonsense that you're putting yourself in that you don't want to be around. So when your leader, when the owner of this team, the governor, is toxic and chaotic, there's no certainty anywhere. And that's what makes things hard. We thought we got a break from it when we were winning. Um, and maybe that's what it takes to keep him calm. It's like, oh, things are good. I don't need to worry about anything. But when things are hectic, he probably feels the need to get his imprint everywhere and say, okay, maybe we need to make this move and this move and this move. So I do wonder just how much control does Monty have? And the question is, how much freedom is he going to be allowed to make a move like that? And I do wonder the Fox move would be, I don't think we would, depending on the return, of course. I just think there are certain teams we could reach out to who would want De'Aaron Fox and would say, we have the young talent and we also have draft picks to throw at you to make this work. Because Foxy is a max level player where he would get a big return for a guy like Fox. Um, and there are some teams who, in theory, this would kind of make sense to make it happen. So I just it would be interesting to me. Just we're gonna get into it in the next couple weeks here, especially if they continue to fall. Um, because the more we lose, the more the heat turns up. And they don't, everything can be fine and dandy now. We still have over a month of basketball to be played. That's 10 plus games to be played. We just talked about a few weeks ago how this 10-game stretch that we were going into, that we're in the middle of right now, that we're 2-6 in right now, was going to be the difference that makes or breaks this season. And we are watching it break right now. So
We called it.
we called it. So it's like this was going to be the stretch, and now all of a sudden we're in potential fire sale mode. We're in potential, okay, let's see what we can do here. And I just, why not? Like at this point, like you said, we fired Mike Brown. Why not just pull the band-aid on everything else and just set ourselves up? Like you can get good pieces. Like I saw this Houston trade, and I don't know how much they would make this, but let's say for example they threw out this Houston trade where we would move Fox, McDermott, and Lyles, and then we would had two draft picks that were involved. They were going to be for pick swaps with Houston for Fred VanVleet, Reed Shepard, Cam Whitmore, and then a mixture of their draft picks, and then so it'd be like a draft swap. So then we would get whoever gets the better of those two picks, the Kings would keep. So we would get picks potentially that are better. So and I'd be okay with something like that because you get young talent and you also get a veteran presence in Van Vliet who can start in the meantime while you get young guys. If you want to do Reed, if you want to do Devin Carter, whoever you want to throw in there, like there are ways to pivot around this, and there are other teams like the Spurs, the Magic, like teams who could use a point guard like Fox,
Mm-hmm.
and even the Lakers. Like the Lakers are going to be a name because of the Rich Paul connection. Like it's going to start getting very loud here over the next month while we figure out this whole trade deadline stuff. And if the Kings do keep Fox, who are we bringing in to help build keep Fox here? So that's going to be the where this is a tough road we got to navigate, and it's going to happen here in a month. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and that's a really good point because the question, I guess, at this point for Sacramento and the organization is: do you know rebuild without De'Aaron Fox, or do you retool with De'Aaron Fox? Because you can't rebuild with De'Aaron Fox. I don't. I think that would be a form of malpractice because if De'Aaron Fox sees a rebuild starting in Sacramento, he's asking out. Like he will play the rest of the season and he's asking out. He's not going to be a part of another failed rebuild attempt. And and I feel like the Sacramento Kings would be failing themselves by trying to rebuild without using De'Aaron Fox as a key piece of that rebuild, because you're going to get a great return for a player like De'Aaron Fox. And I just feel like if you decide that we're going to retool or we're going to try and rebuild around De'Aaron Fox, you're going to be completely failing not just De'Aaron Fox, but yourselves. Because at that point, you're going to have a disgruntled point guard who's going to want out. That decreases his trade value because, well, he's asked out. At that point, it's on organizations' minds that this guy, whoever X player is wanting out. That that signifies that looks like this could happen again if we fail this guy, whatever the case. It lowers a guy's return because they have the leverage at that point. And other teams have the leverage as well because your goal at that point is to move him versus if you're not rebuild or you're going for a rebuild and you're shopping De'Aaron Fox and you're creating a bidding war for him. Like that's an entirely different scenario. So
Mhm.
I I think the best approach, and again, this is less than a week after firing Mike Brown. It still feels very fresh here in Sacramento, but I feel like the proper thing to do is to rebuild, and that's to not include De'Aaron Fox in that rebuild because you need to get him out of Sacramento. You need to let him have an actual NBA career, and on top of that, you're going to get the best return from De'Aaron Fox that you would get out of trading anybody else on this team.
Mhm.
And if you want to really set yourself up, if you want to really evaluate yourself and evaluate your best scenarios in terms of a return and what it looks like in a couple years from now and for picks, for youth, for whatever, it's going to be De'Aaron Fox.
Mhm. And we have the pieces. Like I trust, and I wonder how much of this, like these most recent drafts, was Monty kind of preparing, trying to hit on a guard in case Fox, ends up inevitably leaving, or Monk, or however it was. But we saw Devin Carter have his first G League action, and he looked really good. I was
Really
happy
good.
to see him play well. He had 29 points. He was shooting the heck out of the ball. He was making his impact felt everywhere. For his first game back from his surgery, that's awesome to see. His shot looked really
Yeah.
pretty. I was really happy to see it. I was like, that's the guy I was excited for coming in. Um, so there's a chance we get to see him on the roster here or playing games for the Kings very, very soon because he's activated off of the G League roster. He's now on Sac's, official roster again. So it'll be good. It'll be interesting to see how he plays. Right. I think I wouldn't be, if I'm the Kings, I'd be like, hey, maybe let's let Fox play like 10 more minutes so we can get a little peek of Devin or get a little peek of
Mm-hmm.
Devin with Keon or someone like that. Um, and just see what life would be like if Devin plays really well. You'd be like, okay, maybe we can trade Fox and then balance out the roster a lot better, get in more pieces. And that'll be, that's the thing. We're now in this mode where every game's going to kind of be analyzed by, okay, what are the rotations? How often are we seeing these same rotations? Are they going to stay like this for the next month? If nothing happens, then are they really prepping for a move, or are they going to showcase some of the players that they want to trade a little bit more? So it'll be, teams do that at this time of the year when they're in the position we are. You watch the Warriors kind of do it. That's why they were running out 13-man rosters for the first half of
Mm-hmm.
the year. Is like, hey, look at all these young guys that we could potentially, kind of shop around out there if we're still winning. So, um, we have a world where, you know, where it's the toughest conversation, but maybe it's the best move to let our best player of the past decade go. And I think it's tough, but I think again, when you realize, I think it's up to the team to realize what, that they kind of hit their ceiling and we need to pivot. Otherwise, we're just going to be stuck in this never-ending loop of mediocrity for the next, 17 plus years again, potentially
Right.
knowing this franchise. So it's like we never know. We had one playoff season in the past 19 years that we haven't done anything. We haven't done a single thing. So, um,
You know what's funny? I'm sorry to interrupt
no,
you,
you're
but
good.
that one playoff year, it feels like we're holding onto it like it's a newborn child. Like we don't want to let it go. We can get back there, guys. Like we can totally get back there. Other teams who are consistent playoff teams would look at that year and be like, well, we got lucky because I mean this squad ain't it. It's time to make some moves. Like why are the Sacramento Kings feeling like we haven't peaked with this roster? That was absolutely a peak year. It was absolutely a peak year because you were third in the Western Conference, a large part of that due to the massive injuries around the Western Conference. You were a game 7 first round electric round 1 exit, and you're holding on to that season like it was the best thing that's ever happened to your organization. Why? Because, well, I mean, in a lot of ways it is in the last 17 years prior to that. So
Right.
I don't think you can look at this roster and then continue in 2025 now to look back at 2022 and say that we can get back to that same form after
Exactly.
everything that's happened.
Yeah, it was, and that was the thing. New system, nobody had really seen an offense operate like ours, and then they picked up on it really quick. It happens in sports all the time, and that's what
All the
happens
time.
when we don't add any wrinkles, when we don't make any changes. And we also suffered from the brain drain of losing some coordinators that mattered a little bit more than people expected. Jordy Fernandez, now a head coach, was a huge part of it. We had, um, I apologize if I forget her, if I mispronounce, if it's Lindsay Harding, I believe that
Yep.
was, yeah.
Lindsey
So
Harding.
she was a huge part of our assistant coaching staff too. Then she was a G League coach and won the whole thing, and now she's
Now with the
on another
Lakers.
coaching staff. But like, yeah, exactly. So you're missing people who had an impact on a lot of these players that are on this roster now, and then you hear the same voices that kind of get stale, and the voices you enjoyed are gone. So it's just tough. It's hard. That's why teams sustaining successes in sports is impossible. And like when you see these teams do it, there's a reason that they're doing it so well, and it's just hard to be a part of an organization that just can't seem to figure it out. And as a fan base, it's frustrating.
Exactly.
So
It is.
we will see. We'll see what kind of happens. We're going to have a lot to talk about in the next couple weeks here. And the question is, will they win? Because winning will fix everything. But they've only won one. They've won their most recent game against Dallas with three of their stars out. Um, and it took an effort, but we had lost five straight, all of them at home. So it's like we blew the homestand. We're a better road team than we are at home this year, so maybe that's something to keep an eye on that trend. But I mean, we cannot be this bad at home. We're not going to make any noise. We're not going to scratch the playoffs if we do that. We're still very much in the hunt. Teams like the Warriors, teams like the Suns, they're hurt, struggling. Like they're not. They started off hot, but now they're not playing well. So fortunately, we're still kind of in the play-in hunt. We're only four games back from the tenth seed, but that's a lot, right? We shouldn't be in this spot. We should be in a top six spot. You have teams that are suffering this year. We can figure this out. We have the talent to, but then again, that goes back to coaching, or that goes back to the leadership. Like, who is going to step up? Because we're getting a lot of good individual performances, but this team has not played a single game where they played all 48 minutes well. And that's the part that sucks, because we can play three-quarters of a game well, and that one quarter that we play poorly completely screws us over.
So what you're banking on is obviously interim head coach Doug Christie. He has a really great resume as a basketball player and a reputation that is just hard nosed, gritty defense. And and the first things that he talked about as being the interim head coach was simplifying not just the offense but simplifying the defense. And that's not to say that Mike Brown's system and that coaching staff system that they were implementing was difficult, but when you're talking about taking pride in the little things and getting back to the nitty gritty details that we're not being focused on, you have to simplify. You have to simplify and get back to that standard, get back to rolling straight through the basics before you can get back to a complicated offense. So I think Doug's on to the right idea here. He's trying to simplify things. He's trying to let them play. Like one of the things that he said that I feel iffy about, but ultimately I think I feel good about is he wants to get the hell out of the way and let De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and those guys just do their thing. And I kind of get that from a coaching standpoint. You don't want to try and take guys out of their element and take guys out of their strengths. You want them to play to their strengths, but at the same time, you want them to have a direction. So what we're banking on is Doug to simplify the offense, simplify the defense, make things feel easier and smoother, and then get back to those basics, get back to the details, and take pride in those details, have a sense of pride in this season, and then ultimately try and find success with the now third hardest schedule left. So here we go. Buckle up.
Yeah, things are, yeah. So we talked about how these past 10 games were going to change the whole course of the season. This next stretch of games, this next 10 game stretch is going to define a lot of what the future, the overall multiple years of the Kings are going to look like here.
Yeah.
So we're in a tough spot, but I think, for right now, that's kind of all we can cover. We'll see, and we're going to have more discussions on how serious are these Fox discussions going to end up being, what moves are going to actually be available. There are moves being made, trades are happening. So it's like here we are again, kind of in the middle of it, and nothing's happened outside of a move that hasn't benefited us yet. So it'll be interesting to see how we move forward.
Well, and one of our trade targets, Dorian Finney-Smith, is on our good rivals over there, just south of us in LA.
Yeah.
So you already missed out on one of the key additions.
Yeah. So yeah, and then you got the Lakers making a smart roster move, and that's going to potentially help benefit them, and we're going to see it. They're going to reap the benefits right away, and we're going to be suffering. Fortunately, we don't play them again this year. So, and given the way that we've been playing, I think that's kind of a good thing at this point. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. I have no idea what to expect. I have no idea what we're going to be seeing here. But it starts tonight. I believe they play a game tonight. So we will see how that works out. But I mean, hey, some of these, if we peel off some wins here, maybe it was just the system and the players needing to just play within themselves a little bit more. But we'll see what happens. All right, so let's push on forward. We will be right back. We're going to be talking some football. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. We will be right back. All right, we are back to talk some Philadelphia Eagles, my dude. They took care of business, dominated 41-7 against the Cowboys. We are locked into the 2 seed. So, a lot of good stuff to take away there. I was gonna do a moments of the game, but at the same time, I had went over some of those moments on the post game pod, so please feel free to go check those out. There was a conversation from this game that was dominating the headlines earlier this week, but it's kind of been put to rest now. But we'll talk about it a little bit because I was curious on your opinion. So, Saquon Barkley finished this game against Dallas with 2,005 yards for the season, which puts him at the 8th highest rushing season, single season with the rushing yards of all time, which was super cool, super great accomplishment. But then the conversation that dominated the storylines was, oh, will Saquon use this week, which is meaningless, to push for the all-time rushing record because he was 101 yards away from breaking it. Nick Sirianni and the Eagles announced that Saquon will be sitting this week, so that discussion has kind of gone out the window. But were you interested in Saquon breaking the record? Do you think he should have going into this week?
And personally, no. The the ultimate goal is getting to the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl. The record's cool, and I get it. It would be a cool feat for Saquon and for the O line, right? But in the grand scheme of things, isn't going to mean a thing when you're gunning for a Super Bowl like the Eagles are, and that's kind of where my head's at. Obviously, I'm not an Eagles fan. I'm not really a Saquon fan by that standard either. I really enjoy watching the Eagles and Saquon play football, but from my side of things, I just can't see how you'd get. It's not like he's 40 yards away. If he's 40 yards away, play him the first quarter. He'll get it in the first quarter. But 100 yards, that's going to take like 3 quarters. And at that point, you guys haven't had weeks since, what was it, week 5?
Yeah, week 5.
So at that point, it's like, give your guys a bye week that, it's well deserved, whether it's a 1 seed or not. It's a well deserved bye. They crushed the second half of the season after week 6, and that's something that, give your guys a break and then go into the first round of the playoffs and just start making statements game after game and get yourself to the bowl and win the bowl, because that's the ultimate goal. That's what's more important than this record, as cool as it would have been.
Yeah, and that's the argument I saw a lot of people making when discussing the Lions this week against the Niners, and we'll talk about that game a little bit. But the case was for the Lions was they didn't have to play any of their starters this week against the Niners because that game was meaningless, because the game that matters is this weekend on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
But Dan Campbell, stood his ground and said, "Hey, we're going to play all of our guys." And so if they lose next week, if they lose on Sunday, then they lose the opportunity to have a true bye week. And then I think that was when we talk about the Eagles, and we were in a similar position, but I think the Eagles tipped their hand in this game, right, against the Cowboys, because everyone's talking about, oh, they should let him go for it. If they wanted to let him go for it, they took him out with 10 plus minutes left in the fourth. Like he had just eclipsed 2,000 yards. It didn't look like he was slowing down at that point. They were wearing down the Cowboys defense. Um, but they did it. They gave him a timeout, like a celebration, like, oh, hey, look, we got 2,000 yards. Like that was awesome. Um, but ultimately, the goal was, I think, too, if they were going to go for the record, they would have ran him more. And listen, he had touched the ball
I agree.
31. He touched the ball 31 times. What's four more touches, going to really do when you've already gone that much? That would have been at worst 20 yards for him. So then the conversation's like, oh, okay, 80 yards. You can get that with two big runs in a half. Um, but I'm glad that going into this, when he had passed 2,000, I was like, oh, let's go for the record on Sunday. But then as the days went on, I was like, okay, well, we clinched the 2 seed. There's nothing for us to play for. We haven't gotten the rest since week 5. That was the first available bye week of the season. So we've been playing a ton of football and we've been winning a lot. And I think we put ourselves in this position so we can earn the right to get that rest, whether it comes week 18 or that first round of the playoffs. So um, I'm happy that Saquon isn't going for it. I'm happy that he got the 2,000. Like, that's awesome. That's more than I could have expected. He broke this single season all-time scrimmage yards record for Philly too, so that was also very cool. So he has those. It's not like his season. This doesn't make his season any less special. Like it was one of the rare running back
Right.
seasons that we'll ever see. So um, I would have been I full disclosure, I would have been 1,000% okay with any decision that happened. Like I would have been cool if they went out there and said we're going for the record. I would have been like, okay, cool. Could have done a little bit more to go for it last week, but okay, let's go for it if that's what they believe in. But I know some of these vets, like Lane Johnson was happy with 2,000 and he needs the rest. You can't rest everybody, so it's gonna be these key guys next week. Um, that get rest, and it'll be interesting to see how they approach it because the important storyline is Jalen Hurts going to play? He's still in concussion protocol. Nick Sirianni hasn't really given us a major update yet. It is Wednesday. We'll find out a little bit more today and as the week goes on. But I do think, excuse me, I do think that if Jalen is cleared and good to go, I would not be surprised if we see him out there for a few, like a series or two, just to because the last play he had was a concussion. And do you want Jalen going into a potentially tough matchup in the playoffs coming in with some rust, or do you want him to kind of just get into a rhythm of things and take him out and then go from there? Um,
Great point.
so it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But if they don't play them, then that's fine. Get Jalen as much rest as possible. I'm totally cool with that. Keep him as healthy as you can, and then we're going to see our starters rest. So, listen, in terms of this game, I'm kind of okay if we take a loss, guys. Like I think from a from a Philadelphia Eagles standpoint, it benefits us to let the Giants beat us because if the Giants lose, they have a much better chance at a top 3 to 5 pick. But if if the Eagles lose, the Giants could catapult all the way up to like 6th or 7th or 8th again, and they lose out on their potential quarterback of the future again. So that would be one of those things that comes into effect because these Giants players, they got wrecked last time and they're definitely going to want to say a little something. It would be a little frustrating to lose in front of your home fans. So I doubt our, second and third stringers who do end up playing are going to, go down without a fight. But that would be a little nugget that if they lose this game, I'm not going to be upset about. So something to look out for.
It is interesting to see New York continuing to just do New York things.
Right.
It's hilarious because there is such an obvious scenario and likely scenario that plays out where the Giants do somehow win this game and it just botches their chances at getting their guy, whoever their guy is going into the draft. And I do they want a quarterback? Well, it doesn't look like you do because if you do, you were going to be losing out here and
Yep.
locking up that number one pick, but you haven't done that. So New York's been making some interesting decisions for sure. I wouldn't be mad with a loss either. In fact, I think I would probably celebrate a loss because you could probably bank on the fact that New York will continue to be incompetent and incompetitive, or uncompetitive in that by that standard.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Eagles are locked, like you said. This is this is the week you give your guys some rest. Not everybody, but most of them, most of those key guys. And I do agree. You give Jalen like a rep or two if he's good to go, because you got to be able to shake off some rust before the playoffs. Like that's to come back after, it would be 3 weeks at that point,
Yeah,
right?
3 weeks.
So to come back after 3 weeks without really playing much football, aside from just team camps and being part of practices, to go out there and have to lead your guys down. And, the first narrative to start the game is, can the Eagles score in the first quarter? Because whether they've done it or not, obviously they have, it hasn't been consistent throughout the year.
Right.
There's been a lot of games where they've failed to put points on the board in the first quarter. That trend has gotten a little bit better here as the season's progressed, but it's still something that you need to focus on. And you're way more likely to put points on the board early, which you need to do in a playoff game, if Jalen Hurts is able to shake off some rust prior to the first playoff game.
Yep. So, and that's what makes this tough. So we'll pivot to the next portion of this conversation, because getting Jalen rest might, benefit him for some ways. But in context, in 2022, he got hurt in week 15. It was a different injury. It was a shoulder collarbone injury, and he sat out 2 weeks and then played the last week against the Giants just to get some reps. He played a half, then they took him out. So in theory, they have a history of playing Jalen in that spot. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for them to do it, and I don't think they would be putting him at any major risk for doing it, since it's a concussion. Concussions are weird. Everybody's a little different. But I trust that if Jalen's healthy, he's healthy in that sense. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But again, whatever they decide to do will be, I don't think we can kill them one way or another for it. But when it comes to the playoff matchups, it gets a little interesting if we want Jalen to fight rust, given the matchups we have ahead of us. It's when we look at this playoff picture now, and Ben and I are going to do a whole, post-game prediction pod next week. Really excited for it. It's going to be fun. But as it stands right now, the Eagles are slated to play the Green Bay Packers as the 7th seed. But if a couple things happen this weekend, if Washington loses and the Packers win, which is very likely, the Commanders play the Cowboys, which is a likely win for them. The Packers play the Bears, likely win for them. And then they need, I believe it was either the Bucks or the Falcons to lose in order for the Packers to slide up to the 6th seed. But that's the problem we're facing right now, Packers or Washington. And the question for the whole Jalen of it all is, if we're playing either one of those teams, both of those teams are very tough matchups. Do we want Jalen shaking off rust with him when the stakes matter the most and it's going to be pressured packed? I'm not that worried about it, but it is going to be something to monitor. I do think because of the defense that we have, it does allow Jalen to shake off some rust. But the problem is, in a playoff game, do we want to put him in that position? So it'll be interesting to see. If he's not good to go, I'm okay with playing him. Playoffs, it is what it is. That's just how it's going to go. And he'll be rested, and I'm okay with that. So it's just something to monitor. But out of those two, out of the Packers and Washington, if you're, from an outside perspective, who do you think would be the toughest matchup for Philly?
I think either one is going to be, a tough matchup for any team. And for Philly's standpoint, obviously you beat both those teams. You lost to the Commanders once, but even that game you probably shouldn't have lost, because if Smitty makes that catch, GG's.
Yeah.
I think I feel a little more confident if I'm an Eagles fan. I'd probably want to play the Vikings. And the reason that I say that, I know you say, well, all right, sorry. So we got Commanders and Packers.
Yeah. We'll talk
That's
about
right.
for the other matchups, because the Vikings, the worst they're going to be is 5th, and the best they're going to be is number 1. So
Right.
the
So that's
Eagles,
later down the road.
yeah. So the two matchups that are guaranteed to happen, it's either going to be between Green Bay or Washington.
Right. So I would want to play Washington. And the reason being, Packers are a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. And when I'm looking at the Packers defense, the rushing defense, they're 6th in the league. And I know that, the Eagles have continued to put yards up on the ground with Saquon, regardless of who's on the other side. But look, things get tougher in the playoffs. We've talked about that. And the obvious goal going in against the Eagles as a defense is to stop Saquon Barkley and force Jalen Hurts to beat you through the air, because that's been the storyline. It will continue to be the storyline, is what that passing offense can do. And we've seen the good games out of Hurts, but we've seen some bad games out of him this year as well. And one of the storylines in this is how much rust can he shake off in Week 18 prior to the playoffs. And if he doesn't shake off any, you absolutely have to believe that they're going to force Jalen Hurts to beat you through the air,
Yeah.
because that's going to be the storyline. So I think I feel a little bit better about Washington, because realistically, you should have had both those games against them. I know it's tough to beat a team 3 times, right? But um, it's one of those situations where Jaden is a rookie and he would be seeing the playoffs for the first time in his career, and he would be going to the link
Hmm.
where it's going to be very loud and very rowdy. And the Eagles don't want to drop another game to a team that they don't feel like they should be dropping any games to. So I would feel better about that than I would the Packers, who the Packers have found a little bit of a stride here towards the end of the season. Regardless of the losses, they've looked damn good.
Yeah, and the Packers have also proven that it doesn't matter if they're the seventh seed, that they can come out and make some noise in the playoffs. They
Truth.
did it last year. They went on the road twice and almost took out the Niners, and they definitely blasted the Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
And the Eagles game, listen, like I don't know how much stock I put into that game, week one matchup. I felt like for the players, it felt like a season of their own, right? They go to Brazil, they're playing on a slippery field. Like first week rust, everything was like week one is kind of in that scenario is really hard to kind of say, oh, okay, this was a game that we can totally take. The
Mm-hmm.
Eagles beat them soundly. Like it wasn't like that. So yeah, there is a little bit of uncertainty there, and the Packers have been, hitting their best stride, and as they normally do at the end of at the end of the year. So I do think with the experience of it all, the Packers would be a tougher draw. Like you said, Jaden has been playing awesome, but the Commanders are inexperienced. Dan Quinn's
Mm-hmm.
been in the playoffs as a coach, but to have to coach a team this young in the playoffs would be tough. And I just don't think they have the same level of talent. And the Eagles, yes, like it's a division opponent. Both teams kind of have each other's numbers, but I do think that the Eagles have consistently shown that they can beat Jaden. I think that they can force him into turnovers, and we will offensively not have to deal with. They beat us with Kenny Pickett, last time we were up 14-0, and they, you got to give them credit for clawing their way back. But with Jalen in that game, it would have been a totally different story. So I do think that if we were to face off against them again, I would feel very, very confident going against the
Yeah.
Commanders.
And I just pulled up on Fox Sports. I pulled up the defensive rankings for the season. So overall, the Commanders are they're a top 10 defense by defensive yards per game. They're the ninth seed, or the ninth place. But where I start to kind of get worried, obviously they're a top 3 defense through the air. But when I look at their rushing defense, they're 28th in the league, allowing 136 per game. And that's something that, like, you got to keep an eye on, because Saquon's going to be pounding the rock. Obviously, we just talked about the goal going in against the Eagles is stop that. I don't know how much more you can do as the Commanders from a personnel standpoint. It's going to be schematically, how can you stop Saquon Barkley? I just don't see how they can. And that's where I would be like, from an Eagles standpoint, give me Washington every single time.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, it sucks because the Packers couldn't take care of business. And it's going to set us up for you know a potential matchup with Green Bay. And listen, I'm not afraid of either team. I do think Green Bay would pose the tougher matchup. Matt LaFleur is a better coach, great experience. Jordan Love's been inconsistent, but they found a system of being balanced. I do think the Eagles. I think the Packers are what the Eagles are in a sense of how they like to run their offense. They have good receivers. They have a great running back. They rely on their offensive line and their defensive line to make plays. But they're like a step below. They're just like a tier below of like the guys that we have. So I just think that it would be a good game, but especially at the link, it wouldn't make that much of a difference for a team like Green Bay because they play in the freezing cold all the time. So I don't think that environment of it all would be that different for them. So that's the only thing that would worry me about Green Bay is that like they've been through it before. That experience, it's not like it won't be as big of a home field advantage as if we're bringing the rookie in. And listen, Jaden has done great things this year and has shown up in the biggest moments. Um, so far this year and has made some awesome plays when it's mattered. So I wouldn't discount them entirely, but I'd feel a lot better. So it'll be interesting to see. We will find out officially on Sunday who the matchup is, and then we can start breaking down all the matchups that we're looking forward to. Because in the NFC side of things, it's going to be a very wild and hectic playoff. So I'm very excited to see some of these first round matchups. This could be the year where teams that were the 5, 6, or 7 seed could be the representative in the Super Bowl realistically. So it's very interesting to see that from that dynamic. We're going to have the first 14 win team as a 5 seed, ever. So this will be very interesting to see just kind of how the playoffs shake out, who gets what. But we will definitely break that down more this week. I don't know if I'm doing a post game pod this week. We'll figure that out just for the sake of. I mentioned it on the post game pod just because this game isn't important. They're not pushing for the record. So you and I can always just discuss the playoff matchups on the playoff pod. So we'll see what happens there. But we will keep you guys posted. So with that, let's push on. I think that's enough on the Eagles. We'll talk about the Niners now. And listen, the Niners played a relatively good game. They kept it toe to toe with the Lions the whole time. And the story of this game, and I'll definitely leave it up to you to decide. Obviously, the biggest storyline that came from this was the Brock Purdy injury. And I'll let you break that down a little bit more. There was some good that came from this game, but the one that stuck out was the Brock Purdy injury. So you want to talk about that a little bit before getting into any of the good things you saw from the game?
Yeah, we're going to do a lot of offseason discussion on Brock Purdy, so I'll keep it kind of short and light here. But it's a glaring issue with your franchise quarterback or potential franchise quarterback that we've seen now a few times. So since the NFC Championship game, where the Eagles damaged my Pookie Bear, Brock Purdy, since he had his UCL repaired, he's had nerve damage, and there's hits that he takes where he gets stingers. He gets this burning. He talks about this burning sensation that happens in his elbow, and it happens again on Monday night, where he takes a hit that doesn't seem any more egregious than any other hit that a quarterback would see. In fact, it looks a little bit lighter than normal, and just a little bit of a roll up hit. He goes off the field and he's kind of testing it out, and you see him just lightly throwing. He can't even put power behind the ball. And at that point, Josh Dobbs comes in, leads an easy drive. The easy drive wasn't because of Josh Dobbs. I like Josh Dobbs, but the Lions are in soft coverage, so everybody can stop overreacting about that. But the issue now, we talk about how much money Brock Purdy is potentially going to be offered and potentially going to be inking with the 49ers in this offseason, because I don't see him playing on his last year option. It's just not a thing. It's not something that quarterbacks really do. You talk about that 50 to 60 million range, bro, and I get a little bit nervous because this is there's already issues now with the last 3 weeks. You've been within one score. You have a chance to go down and win the game, and Brock throws boneheaded interceptions. And I like the shots that he's taking. I don't want him to stop taking those shots and making those plays, trying to make those plays. But there's got to be a point where you are a little bit safer with the football. And we saw him being unsafe and reckless with the football in Iowa. And you didn't see that in the first couple of years, where he was really being limited in a lot of ways. And then when the cards are open, the deck is wide open, everything's out on the table, and you've got injuries up and down, and you're forced then as a quarterback to make those plays. He has failed to make those plays this year. At times he's made those plays and it's been awesome. And you go, well, this is our franchise guy. But you just can't ignore some of these issues with the injuries and with the interceptions and so on and so forth. I can go up and down the ladder. You also can't ignore the bro having 377 yards and 3 touchdowns, right? So there's an interesting side of these things. And I talked about a couple weeks ago, the potential offseason negotiation pain that the Niners and the fans might be put through with an opening number that could be vastly different from what Brock and his camp is trying to get versus what the Niners are willing to offer. And I wonder at this point, is Brock is capable of being a really, really good quarterback, but is he capable of being that $50-60 million quarterback? Because I'll be honest with you, if he's paid 50 to 60 million, I'll eat it. I'll swallow it. It'll be fine. But at that point, you're completely judged and based on a whole new level. So at that point, if you're not playing to a 50, $60 million standard, like some of these guys are, and there are quarterbacks up in that range who aren't playing that way, and you
Exactly.
see what their fan base is talking about, when their organizations are talking about them, it's a catastrophic mistake in terms of a team building standpoint. So it's something I'm a little bit worried about, but we'll see. We'll see how this offseason shakes out.
Yeah, I think that's the tough decision because a lot we talked about this last time we had the Brock Purdy convo was like when you compare the potential that he's going to get paid to some of these other guys who are in that bracket already, the Jalen Hurts, the Tuas, Jared Goffs, Trevor Lawrence, like out of those guys, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff have been to a Super Bowl. Brock has been to a Super Bowl. None of those other guys who got paid have been to a Super Bowl. Same with Dak. Um, so when you talk about from a fan perspective, you also have to think about okay, we've seen what we can do when Brock is playing well. I do think that I've talked about this. I noticed this comparison between Brock and Jalen in the sense of when all of a sudden you're getting discussed as a $50 million quarterback. I think it happens all the time where the player or the organization feels the need to say, okay, we have a $50 million quarterback. let's let's make him look like one. Like let's make him do all these other things that wasn't what got us here. And I think then like for the Niners this season's been so hard to judge Brock because he hasn't had any of the pieces that got him there before.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there's a bit of, you know, it's in the NFL it is what it is, but it is a bit unfair to say, you know, Brock had help and then who's to say that he wouldn't have produced a similar season as last season with all the pieces together, and then in which case it turns into a no-brainer. Oh, we're definitely paying him.
Exactly.
So I think it's tough, and I think Brock has been doing well despite some of these negative circumstances. And we've seen players who can turn interceptions around. Dak Prescott was an interception king. Then the year after, he has a career year. Jalen Hurts was the interception king last year. He's doing
Mm-hmm.
really well. Josh Allen, interception king. He's done really well. Brock is a smart, capable player. I know he can limit turnovers. I just think that it's a product of who he has around him. Kyle not doing him any favors with his play calling. And again, it's just like, I think that next year, the question is if they it's going to be hard to say for Brock, okay, I'm going to play out on another $900,000 contract. But if he does, and then the Niners get a in between season where it's not the peak, but it wasn't as bad as this year. So somewhere in between, the Niners are competing, things look good. Then the question is, okay, do we pay him now or do we franchise tag him? Do we keep him, kind of force his hand? We're going to pay him, we're going to give him a raise, but it's not going to be the max contract, and then see if he's okay with that. And it'll be interesting to see. They are in a tough spot, and it sucks that this had to be the year to kind of make that decision to kind of, it sucks because you lose all the luster of 2023 and what happened then. So it sucks. Like it's a tough spot because like you feel this doubt, you feel this uncertainty. Um, when I think Brock has done enough to justify a potential contract. But I don't know how crippling it would be, but again, you as a fan, you see every game, you know what the ceiling is for this team. Was the ceiling 2023 because none of these other guys are going to be able to come back because of health? And so like it'll be interesting to see how next year's teams look. But yeah, this offseason is going to be dominated by Brock for sure.
Yeah, and we'll kind of cut that conversation there because, like I said, we're going to be talking about this a lot more, and this is going to be
Yep.
a massive topic going into the off season. But you know, I'm not tripping too hard about it because regardless of who we have at the helm next season, we're going to be bringing back a majority of who's on this squad, and the biggest thing to keep an eye on as the Niners end the season is they're going to finish fourth in their division regardless of a win or loss, which gives them, Marcos, the easiest schedule in the world going into next year. So
Exactly. Bounce
it's
back.
it's not set. The opponents are set. The way it shakes down and the schedule itself is yet to be determined. But in terms of a home crowd, obviously we see our division, and then we see the Panthers, the Jaguars, the Titans, the Falcons, and the Bears in our house. That sounds pretty damn easy. Now, you go on the road, you see all your division, and then you see the Colts, the Saints, the Texans, the Bucks, the Giants, and the Browns. I'm scared of maybe two teams in there.
Yeah.
Like this, and that's saying that this year as well. Like, of all those, if we had this record this year with all these injuries, the Niners are in the playoffs and it's not close.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, the Niners didn't have a great schedule, and we talked about their rest disadvantage that they played with all
Yep.
season long and how it was one of the worst ever. And we talk about all the injuries that racked up from the offseason basically all the way through. Like, you haven't had that consistent roster. You haven't had consistency at all. You talk about how lack of depth of this team. Look at a team like the Lions this week who could have sat X, Y, and Z starter and would have been fine, because guess what? They've got so many guys out on injury and are still finding ways to win. So, there's issue with the roster, yes, but for a roster that's got issues, you're going into next year with a really easy schedule. So from that standpoint, I'm not tripping too hard about it. Where I do want to see this team kind of make some moves is, Ricky Pearsall just had a massive breakout game against the Lions, and it was super exciting to see. Had his first touchdown. George Kittle had another awesome game as the 19th option in the offense, and he's the first. He's the second NFL player to go over 1,000 yards on less than 100 targets. And
Wow.
the only other person to do it was George Kittle himself a year prior. So, there's so many good building points and so many spots that you need to retain, so many guys you need to retain. And there's also guys to move on from. And on top of that, if you lose again this week, it is going to help you, because you will get the 11th at best the 11th at worst probably.
Mhm.
And you'll continue to move up the ladder and potentially get into the top 10.
Which would
So
be huge.
massive. And we'll get into some draft conversations later. I have my guy. I do have a guy that I want.
It's very irresponsible.
It is. Everyone's going to be very upset with who I want, but I'll explain it. Look, there's a clear way for this Niners team to bounce back next year. And that's what's exciting for me, because this was such a drag and BS year for this organization and for this fan base and just the Niners in total. It was tough to watch, and at no point did we really have fun. I had the most fun watching them get beat by the Lions this week, because I saw them slinging the ball. I saw Kyle making the plays that he got back to and got him to the Super Bowl so many times before. I saw this team playing with more fun and more fire. And, from the Lions standpoint, not sitting guys, I get it. You're searching for momentum. They have the momentum, but they want to continue building that momentum. Like, the idea that the Lions were ever going to sit starters for this game is kind of dumb, because number one, Dan Campbell. Number two, I'll just leave it at that. Number two, these guys lost a game that they should have won last year to get them into the Super Bowl.
Mhm.
This game meant a lot to the Lions as an organization and as a player and coach. So they wanted this win. If they wanted something that, all season long was going to give them the fire that they needed at the perfect time, it was winning in week 17 against the 49ers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, the Lions came in, took care of business. It wasn't great. They didn't spank us like they said they did. I would reserve that wording, but you came out and made a statement, and you got a really good win. And that was exactly what the Lions needed to do. Now the Niners just need to get through week 18, and they won't have a Brock Purdy out there. He's not going to be playing. So I think we've seen the last of Brock. We'll probably see Josh Dobbs as my guess, but it's still up in the air because Kyle can't make his mind up about who quarterback 2 is. I would like to see Josh Dobbs, but this game doesn't mean too much. If they get a win, it's not the end of the world from a drafting standpoint. You're still going to have options out there, but if you do lose this game against Arizona, it just helps you even more. So it's not really too much to lose in this case.
Yeah, win-win situation there. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's good then. Do you have any other final thoughts on the Niners before we press on here?
No, let's press on. Bang, bang.
Bang, bang. All right. So we will press on to our Chargers check-in. Listen, we had a goal coming in this year. We've had an experiment coming in this year. Pick a team who was slated to not make the playoffs and bet on them as our third team to make it to the playoffs. Ben, you had the honors of convincing me this year that the Los Angeles Chargers were going to make the playoffs this year. And lo and behold, they have clinched a playoff spot. The worst they can be is 6th. They have a chance to go for the 5th seed this week. How are you feeling knowing you were right about that pick?
I'm happy about it because it means that I know who Harbaugh is. Like that, and that was why I based my decision how I did. You For so many years the Chargers failed Justin Herbert, and from a roster building standpoint, but more so from a coaching standpoint. You never gave him that coach that could really elevate Herbert to the next level. And that was a glaring issue for a number of years. It was a glaring issue going into last offseason. They locked up the coach that they needed and the coach that was going to get the job done. And there was some crazy stat where I think Harbaugh is the only coach or one of the only coaches to come in after a team has completely missed the playoffs the season before and had some kind of a record and then make the playoffs this year. Like the ultimate story behind that stat or that fact is just the complete cultural shift that we saw in the Chargers in that organization throughout this season from last year. And that's something that I banked my decision on. I wasn't going off fact necessarily. I wasn't going off of anything. I was going off gut when I was trying to convince you that this Chargers team can get this done. And I look at a guy like Lab McConkey who had a killer year, and it was all because of the trust that Harbaugh had in not just Herbert but in Lad and in his guys to make plays when they're asked to do so. And Lad's a young guy. He's going to continue to getting better. He's not even close to the top of his of what he's capable of doing, but he's already over 1,000. So, it was an exciting year for the Chargers. What they'll do in the playoffs is yet to be determined. I mean, the AFC is interesting. It's not like the NFC, right? But there are powerhouses in the AFC, and they are going to have to go through at least one, if not two of them. So we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, so to put that into perspective, their record is 10-6. They have a chance to be 11-6 this week, and they just dominated the Patriots 40-7. It was a great showing, all around game. Everyone was really happy about it. But in terms of this week, what matters is if they want the difference for the winning and losing this week is the difference between the 5th seed and the 6th seed. They're currently tied with the Pittsburgh Steelers for the same record, but since they played Pittsburgh earlier in the year and lost, Pittsburgh owns that tiebreaker. So they need some things to happen. And so if they want to be the 5th seed, they need Pittsburgh to lose this week to the Bengals, who are very hungry, trying to fight for that 7th seed. And they need to beat out, and the Chargers need to beat out the Raiders, who are winning. They're pulling a Giants. They're winning when they shouldn't. They're ruining their chances at a draft pick. The Raiders they're gonna try. They're not gonna, lay down, and it's on the road. So if the Chargers win and the Steelers lose, that's the difference between playing the Houston Texans round one as the 4-5 matchup to playing the Baltimore Ravens as the 3-6 matchup. So if you're the Chargers, if you want their best chance to move on, because regardless of what happens, you're most likely, unless the Bengals somehow sneak into the playoffs and beat the Bills round one, which is not out of the question, but your most likely round two matchup is either going to be the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills. And that's the world you're going to live in regardless, so might as well make your path as easy as possible to get there, so then you're ready to go. The Texans are not an easy out, but they have been very inconsistent this year. They have not had the second year from CJ that they have expected. So if I'm the Chargers, this week is very, very important, and you can only control so much. So you're hoping for a win from the Bengals, but I mean, you've done all you can. You got into the playoffs. That's awesome. It's going to be a feel-good story regardless, given all the Jim Harbaugh of it all. So just something to look out for. Now they're healthy. They got J.K. Dobbins back, which was huge last week. They noticed that. So they're getting healthy at the right time, and their defense is just as good as anybody else's in the league. They will compete. They know how to. Then when it comes to playoff football, Jim Harbaugh is ready and locked in. So it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be very cool. Like the Chargers making it is going to be fun. This is going to be a fun matchup. But hey, a potential matchup with the Ravens round one, the Harbaugh brothers, the Harbaugh Bowl going at it again. This will be it. There's going to be some juicy storylines for whatever happens. So I'm happy that the Chargers made it. You were right on the pick. Like, that's awesome. So we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting, and the whole playoffs is going to be exciting, and you got to step back from this standpoint for a second and look at just how many awesome seasons some of these teams had. So many teams going over 10 and 11 wins, and only one's going to win the Super Bowl. Yeah. Like, there's going to be so many freaking upsets, and I get it. I mean, Niners have been there, the Eagles have been there many times. It's one of those situations where that's just football, baby. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's sports in general. But yeah, there's some awesome seasons overcoming some serious, implications to their teams, whether it be injuries or whatnot. Teams just found a way to win, and this is something that I'm kind of banking on the Chargers are doing is starting some of those upsets, and it's going to start in that round one because you're going to be playing the best of the best to start it off, and
Yeah.
and you got to come out and make a statement. If they can get the first game, I would take them in the next matchup as well, regardless who that is, because they would have built momentum. That would be a
Yeah.
massive, massive jump for that organization, and in terms of where they were at and where they even wanted to be in the first place. And so for them to be able to take that into the next matchup, it's huge, something you need to build off of.
Exactly. So that was good. We will push on from our Chargers, and hopefully, when we check in on them next week, we're talking about them and their potential matchup. So we will definitely break that down on our picks pod next week. So
Yes.
we are going to press on to our final segment, the betting picks of the week. So this week was obviously, it's completely up in the air with all the injuries and people sitting guys. So we wanted to talk about three games in particular where the stakes matter and have huge playoff implications for these teams, and I think would be the most logical or fun to bet on. So we'll save the best for last, Ben, but I wanted to start with the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. The Miami Dolphins are 1 point favorites on the road against New York. The Jets are out of the playoffs. They definitely don't have anything to play for outside of Aaron Rodgers going for his 500th touchdown pass, which he's had 3 weeks to do. The Dolphins, if they win this game, and the Kansas City Chiefs beat the Broncos, the Dolphins will sneak into that seventh seed with a win. So this game matters for the Miami Dolphins. They are 1 point favorites. Who would you have in this game if you were to bet on it?
Dolphins, man. I mean, I don't like that Jets team in any way, shape, or form. I think even when they're trying to play their best, they're a terrible ball club, and they just have showed so much inconsistency, and they don't have anything to gun for this week. That's not to say that they're not going to sit anybody, or that they are going to sit anybody rather, but the Dolphins have pieced together games here. I mean, they've figured out ways to win and overcame a season itself full of injuries and ups and downs. Mike McDaniel saw three different quarterbacks throughout this whole season, so he had to make some adjustments on the fly as well. But they're in a situation, in a position where they can gun for a playoff spot, but they have to take care of their side of things. So I think it's safe to take the Dolphins in this game.
Yeah, and one thing to note is that Tua will not be playing in this game. So that's a good
Mm-hmm.
thing in the sense of we won't have to worry about him in the weather. It's Tyler Huntley who will be playing, and Tyler Huntley, former backup of the Ravens, knows a thing or two about playing in these situations,
Yes, exactly.
playing in the cold. So I don't think it'll be that big of a drop off or that bad to expect that Mike McDonald won't be able to get the best out of these guys going in. So the Dolphins would probably be the safe pick. So round two, game two that we wanted to talk about here for a game that had some implications and was going to be the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Cincinnati Bengals on the road against Pittsburgh are 1.5 point favorites, despite having the worst record. Pittsburgh has been on a midst of a losing streak, which was kind of expected given the murderer's row of teams they had to play, and the Bengals were included on that list. Who do you have in this game that would decide Pittsburgh's spot, whether that would be the fifth seed or the sixth seed, or the Bengals clinching potentially, depending on they obviously need some other things to happen too. The Jets would need to win that game. The and the and the Chiefs would have to win their game in order for the Bengals to sneak in with a win. But who do you have in this game?
This one was tough for me. I went back and forth because I can see both scenarios playing out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the Steelers have a little bit more. Both teams have a lot to play for, but I think the Steelers have a little bit more in this to play for because they know where they're going to be. Or rather where they want to be. The Bengals are still banking on other teams around them as well. The Steelers just have to go and take care of business, and they're going to be at home. I don't know what the weather's going to look like in Pittsburgh. I haven't looked that up, but that the only thing that Pittsburgh needs to do is find any way, shape, or form to stop Joe Burrow in that offense.
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals defense is probably not going to get the job done for him. They haven't all season. They will probably not, find any solutions in this game either. So I think it's safe to take the Steelers in this game. I think the Steelers will probably find a way to win this one. It's one of those games you got to have it.
Yeah. And they all they need is a field goal to cover. So that would definitely all they need to do is win to cover because the Bengals are
Exactly.
favored. So this is a good pick, I think. The Steelers are trying to avoid. They're also in a position where listen, they've been to the playoffs a bunch of times recently, but they've been first round exits every time in recent memory. So they want to put themselves in a position to where, hey, same as the Chargers, can we play the Texans first versus playing our rival, the Ravens, who are always a tough matchup. It's always going to be that's not going to be pretty no matter who it goes for. For Ravens, the Ravens probably don't want to see the Steelers. They'd rather see the Chargers too. So it is an interesting dynamic. If you're the Steelers, which direction do you want to take in your positioning? Would you rather,
Yeah.
because regardless, if you're the fifth or sixth seed, two, you're most likely playing the Chiefs round two or the Bills. So it's going to be tough either way.
Yeah.
So which first round matchup matters more? I would probably say I would pick the Steelers in this game too. I agree that the Bengals defense probably won't be able to get the job done. So we will see. But the matchup that we're going to talk about last is definitely the most interesting matchup of the bunch. It's going to be the game for the NFC North. It's going to be the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions. So the Detroit Lions are 2.5-point dogs on the road against Minnesota. There's so much to play for. We talked about this, with the Niners game, that the Lions could have rested guys for this game because this was the game that matters, but they chose not to. They're going off of a Monday night game into short rest to Minnesota, where Minnesota, who played a killer game, to maintain the number one seed. So whoever wins this game gets the number one seed. Whoever loses will be the 5 seed, no matter what. So there's a lot. This game has one of the best or the highest implications in regular season memory. So this game means a ton. So with the Lions, with the Vikings being favorites by 2.5, who would you pick in this spot in this game?
This is another really tough one, man.
Tough, right?
And I went back and forth so many times. Um, Ultimately, Detroit's gonna be popping, bro. Like Detroit, that stadium is going to be so loud because they know what's on the line. Everybody knows what's on the line. This is the matchup that we've been waiting for a number of weeks, and it's only gotten that much more exciting with the implications of being the 1 or the 5 seed, regardless of whoever wins or loses, right?
Right.
So Lions are at home. It's gonna be a crazy loud stadium. It's a crazy environment. I have a little bit more faith in the Lions offense than I do in the Vikings offense, even against that Lions defense that looks very fraudulent at times.
Mm-hmm.
I think the safe pick this week is going with the Lions, and they're who I picked. On this week's picks, they're who I ultimately believe. If anybody was going to give a run for the 1 seed aside from the Eagles, it was going to be the Lions. And all season long, I felt that the Vikings were a good ball club, but I think they were benefiting from a lot of 1-score wins. And I think even this season they have like 11 of them, if I recall correctly. So they found ways to win, but can you, as the as the Vikings offense, keep up with the Lions offense? Because that's what it comes down to. And this is going to be the storyline heading into this one. Is it's going to be a high scoring game. Like I think
sure.
the Lions are easily going to put up 30 to 40 points. And if the Vikings can find a way to be anywhere within 1 score of them, you could probably safely pick the Vikings. But I think that's going to be difficult. And I think that ultimately the Lions will find a way to win this game by at least a field goal or more.
Yeah, so I did speak at the beginning of this. The Lions are favored by 2.5, and the Lions are the home team. I did say the reverse. So for me, I think I feel better about the Vikings in this game, and when we factor in like the other stuff too, they're coming off of a Monday night game where they were in San Francisco, so they have to fly back over. So you're dealing with a little bit of the travel. The Vikings don't have to go that far. It's in a dome, so it doesn't matter for either quarterback how that's going to work out. That defense for the Lions, dude. I mean, the Niners were doing whatever they wanted with the
Mm-hmm.
players that they had available to them. And the Vikings have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and their line has improved, and Aaron Jones is a 1,000-yard rusher. I think it's going to be a very fun, high-scoring game, but I do think that this defense for the Vikings will be able to get one or two more stops at the Lions camp. And I think that's what's going to be the overall difference in this game. They're going to be fresher. They're feeling, this is a battle for the 1 seed. I don't think, for them playing on the road is going to be that big of a difference. So it'll definitely be a close one. The Vikings, they're getting 2.5. So I definitely think the Vikings will win this game. And will cover. So we'll see. This is going to be this is the game of the year. It means so much. It's going to be very cool. And the implications are going to be crazy because it could be the difference between the Lions hosting the NFC Championship game or potentially being bumped in round one by, Tampa Bay, or so that's going to be, this is the world that these two teams are living in. And but the Lions are also undefeated on the road, so I don't know. Like these are going to be things to talk about in the playoffs. But in this game, I think the Vikings have it, and they will clinch the 1 seed.
That's fair. That's fair. So you guys pick what you feel is the more dominating storyline heading into this one, and what you feel is correct. But either one it's going to be a tough call because this is going to be a hell of a matchup. This is a matchup that we've been watching and keeping our eye on for a number of weeks now, and it's finally here.
Yeah, couldn't script it any better to finish this way. That was good.
Mm-hmm.
Good job, by the schedule makers by actually getting a game that is legit. So I'll take it. But yeah, no. So those are our betting picks of the week, and I think we'll need to finish off here unless you have any final thoughts for us.
I'm all good, man.
Yeah, first pot of the new year felt pretty good. Getting out there. Happy New Year to everybody again. We wish you all the best. Hope 2025 is kick ass. Hopefully the Eagles are winning the Super Bowl at the beginning of this year, and then the Niners are in the playoffs at the end of next year. And we're talking about it. A lot has changed in the past calendar year. Like last January, we were talking about the Eagles collapsing and the Niners looking like the Super Bowl favorites, and now it's the complete opposite here. So it's interesting how things change. So hopefully we're having a lot of good conversations here in 2025. We look forward to it. But this was episode 71 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias that are located up above for all you audio listeners out there. The links to the descriptions are down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, review the show. We really appreciate all the love and support. We hope to grow even more so in 2025. We received a lot of traction in 2024, and we appreciate you guys so much for it. But I am Marcos Conan-Negron. Beside me here, as always, is
Benny the Jet Reds.
All right, y'all. We love y'all. We will talk to you next week. Peace.